with Huw Edwards, with regards to, okay, so firstly, he made himself powerful. When I refer to him being abusive, is that I've read that not only was he coming on to other young people there, but that he was gruff and mean and not very nice. And you get a sense of that on TV. His persona, I don't know how someone like that gets to the top. He's not very likable. He was always miserable and dour. I know he had his own mental health issues, doesn't he? I believe, and I don't mean to make light of the fact he may have been depressed, but that dour look, what is it that got him to where he was?
Well, that's a very interesting question. They said the same thing about Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile was an obviously very odd guy and very eccentric. How come he came to dominate TV screens? I mean, when Top of the Pops closed for the final episode, he was the final guy on, sort of switching off the studio lights. So he was, and he got a knighthood. And yet now we reflect, he just was kind of creepy, obviously creepy, right? Again, so how is it, going back to the point we were making earlier, the lens, the way people look at things is hugely influenced by the way they think about the world, and they're not willing to see through their blindness into what really is right in front of them quite often.
Angry, mean person, he seemed like. Well, he got to where he was. Do you imagine that there is, I know we spoke about this at the beginning, that there might be more prevalence of that P word, I'm not supposed to say on YouTube, but people with an inclination for children in maybe the BBC or in TV channels, because it just seems quite prevalent.
Well, remember, I did say it was actually very prevalent out there in ordinary society, so it's important that we see that. I did say that one of the theories about why you're going to find a lot of it amongst famous people is that maybe fame, particularly for men, being famous as a guy is a bit like being, Megan Fox or Marilyn Monroe if you're a woman, basically.
Is that how you found it so far?
Well, I've been married for 30 years, so unfortunately, or fortunately, I became famous after I got married.
I know.
I wish it had happened before, but it is what it is.
I've been making the same mistake. Those lucky wives of ours.
Anyway,
yes.
So basically, one theory is that people are pursuing fame because, for men in particular, the male-female dynamic, I'm going to get into trouble, but don't shoot the messenger. I'm just reporting what the research finds, which is that men tend to, there's a famous saying, men search or men chase and women choose. So there is a dynamic whereby men are used to being rebuffed quite a lot. And what happens if you're a famous man is that you don't get rebuffed in quite the same way. So it's like almost a key to a lock, which many men are trying to find a way of unlocking this door. And fame supplies an amazing key for many men. And this is my clinical experience of dealing with famous men. So one of the questions is, do they realize that at some level? And that's why they're after becoming famous, because a lot of famous men do exploit it. Another thing I have to say about being famous, from my clinical experience of dealing with famous men in particular, it's almost like they think, given I've done all this work, because usually a lot of work and sacrifice goes on behind the scenes to become famous, and we don't see that work. There's a sense of dissatisfaction. Yes, I can get maybe an occasional table in a restaurant that's difficult to get, but it doesn't often deliver for them what they hoped it would deliver. You still have, and this is a common problem in life, the difficult mother-in-law, whether you're famous or not famous. A lot of things actually don't change in life that are a real pain in the ass. So I think that sometimes they kind of go around going, I ought to be able to have more for the fame. And that's why they become transgressive, because it takes them into territory where they discover things get delivered to them because of their fame. And in other words, I think a lot of famous people are a bit frustrated that fame hasn't panned out as they hoped it would be in terms of delivering happiness. And now they use the fame in a transgressive way because they discover it gives them power. And actually, being a famous person and staying within the rules doesn't give you that much power. So I think it's that pursuit of power that leads them into transgression, I think.
So you spoke of adrenaline junkies, you're speaking of power, you're speaking of celebrity and lording it over people and all those kinds of things, ambition. Are these characteristics of psychopathy or on the spectrum towards that way?
Okay. Now we're discussing a very interesting thing, which is personality theory. About people who break the rules and end up in trouble. And this word psychopath is used a lot. I'm not trying to tell you off when I say that, but it's often used incorrectly. And I'm going to get into a slightly technical conversation because there's two other personality types that need to be understood when we're discussing this. And the great thing about these three personality types is known as the dark triad, which I think is a cracking term. So the first one in the dark triad is psychopathy. We'll discuss what that is in a minute. Then there's narcissism, and then there's Machiavellianism. And the point is that you need to hold all three to really cause serious trouble. Usually, if you just have one, that's not enough. So generally speaking, the people you find that hit the news or blow up a company because of their transgressive behavior have elements of three of the dark triad. So psychopathy is relevant to what we're talking about because psychopaths don't have empathy. So they can abuse a child, let's say, or manipulate a homeless person by giving them money and then exploiting them sexually. And there's something missing within them, and we think partly it may be even genetic or something to do with their upbringing, whereby they don't understand what might it be like for the other person. They don't understand the suffering or the distress. Not only do they not even see it, but they don't really care. So what if the other person's suffering? So there's a kind of emotional coldness there, which is crucial to being a villain and not really thinking through very carefully. But other elements of psychopathy that are relevant, that often you don't see in Hollywood movies, but are relevant, is impulsiveness. They're very impulsive. So as a result, they tend to, they see something and then they go for it. While the rest of us are thinking a bit more cautiously, is this wise? The other thing is they're willing to do anything to get to the top. So these people stab you in the back and they don't care. And the other really interesting thing about psychopaths, and this is a little known research fact outside of the academic arena, is when you survey psychopaths and ask them how much do they think psychopathy is out there in the world, right? They always vastly overestimate it. So they think everyone else is a psychopath, right? So they think it's okay for me to be a psychopath because it's like kill or be killed, shaft or be shafted. Most other people who aren't psychopaths tend to assume benignness out there in the world. And by the way, that can be dangerous if you assume too much benignness and don't realize a certain number of people out there who are roaming the streets are psychopaths. So that's psychopathy. Then there's narcissism. Narcissism is you believe you're a wonderful, beautiful human being and you're so outrageously amazing at what you do that how come you're not more successful? So there's this thing that then leads into what's called the narcissistic rage, where people are upset that despite their marvelousness, and even people who present the 10 o'clock news, if they're genuine narcissists, are thinking, why have I not got 5 BAFTAs? Why have they only given me 3 BAFTAs? Why am I not getting an Oscar? Etc. Etc.
Yeah. So I know a few people like that.
So they are driven to always be dissatisfied and a bit upset and a bit angry, no matter how much accolades they're getting. Now, there is a sense in which a little bit of narcissism makes people interesting. There's a famous saying in psychology that narcissists are great on a first date. There's something about their self-confidence that's quite endearing, but it wears very thin by the 10th date, their self-obsession and self-obsessiveness. So there's narcissism. And finally, there's Machiavellianism, which is the bit that people know least about, but is actually perhaps the most important thing. Going back to the Huw Edwards thing, a homeless person contacts them, according to The Sun, and asks for money. He gives them money, but he doesn't ask for anything in return. Gives them more money, gives them more money, gives them more money, and then begins to say things like, aren't you going to do anything for me? Okay? That's the tone of what The Sun said was the nature of the interaction. So Machiavellianism is named after Machiavelli, a Florentine prince from 1500 in Florence, Italy, wrote a famous book called The Prince. The Prince is a guide to power. What's important about Machiavelli is he places power as being the key human dynamic between people. We like to think that between people there's friendship, there's love, there's romance, there's these sentimental stuff. Machiavelli's going, no. You need to understand something. There's always a power dynamic. There's a jockeying for position. And the famous quote, which Machiavelli may not have said, is people are a means to an end. A Machiavellian, when they meet you, are praising you and saying, oh, you play a really good game of tennis, Raj. There's a hidden agenda that they're praising you.
There must be if they're praising your tennis.
Thanks. So they're always after something, and they're softening you up, and you're malleable. So the manipulativeness, which is another word for Machiavellianism, is a key dynamic And so you need all three, the dark triad, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopath. People tend to think you only need one, but really, to blow things up in a major way, all three are essential. One final point about Machiavellianism, because it's a neglected subject, and I think it's actually, in a sense, much more important than psychopathy and narcissism, because the key thing is, once you can spot a narcissist as a narcissist or a psychopath as a psychopath, you can protect yourself from them. You need the manipulativeness bit, right? Because manipulative people charm you so you don't see the psychopathy or the narcissism. And that's when people get dangerous. When you don't see, once you've met a psychopath, if you can spot they're a psychopath, they can't be that dangerous to you because you start protecting yourself. They say, lend me some money. You go, no. But a manipulative person charms you. You don't see the dark side. And as a result, that's why that's much more dangerous. So one final point I want to make about Machiavellianism, because it has been very interestingly studied by psychologists in a way that the lay public don't understand. There's some great scales in psychology that can measure how manipulative you are. They can actually scale you and give you a score. And it's called the Mac scale. And I love the fact that you can be high Mac, which is very manipulative, or low Mac, or if you overeat, Big Mac. Sorry, it's an old joke, but I had to make it sooner or later.
God. Can we do it on me? I want to do this test. Am I manipulative?
I don't know. So far, I've found you fairly straightforward. But
that's because I'm so good at it.
That's exactly.
Okay, so but I'm definitely
really
narcissistic.
Manipulative people, you can't spot it. That's the key point.
I must be narcissistic because my first thought is, I wonder if I'm the thing that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It's always about you.